couple of things about Washington's schedule that I haven't mentioned yet. I've got two what I would call absolute must-watch games on Washington's schedule. I've got a stretch of games where I think they have something to prove. And then I've got an early season game that I think will be a measuring stick game. So I'm going to start with the two must watches. This is a little bit sort of subjective in a matter of personal preference, but at Kansas City Monday Night Football, a matchup between Jaden Daniels and Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs and Washington. That in by the way, late October, Halloween week, leaves are changing. It feels like fall. That just feels like a massive NFL game this year. There are many of them. I mean, look at Kansas City's schedule. Kansas City has a week 2 game against the Eagles. They have Baltimore in week 4. Both of those games, by the way, sort of 425 big time windows, almost standalone windows. They got a game against Detroit on Sunday Night Football. And then they go us on Monday Night Football, and the following Sunday at home on the road against Buffalo. Not to mention they've got games on Thanksgiving Day at Dallas. They got a game against Houston on Sunday Night Football, and a late season, Christmas night game at home against Denver. I mean, the Chiefs, have so much of that all year long in their schedule. But two must watches for me at Kansas City on Monday Night Football. And then I would say certainly the first game against Philadelphia in what could be two incredibly important games at the end of the year. Again, I'll emphasize, I'm surprised that one of the two Philadelphia games is in the highest risk week of the season, week 18, where more often than not, you get at least one of the two teams in the game having nothing to play for. I'm surprised that Washington and Philadelphia are ending the season. But Saturday, week 16, December 20th, at home against Philly in the first opportunity against the Eagles in the rematch of last year's championship game, and potentially a massive late season matchup between two excellent teams vying for division supremacy and for big-time seeding stakes in the NFC. Those seem to be two must-watch games. I think the Detroit game in November is potentially a huge standalone game, but Detroit's one of those teams, just be aware, they're really good, and they were really good offensively last year. They weren't very good defensively at the end of the year. They've got two new coordinators. They play 7 games outside. They certainly seem like an indoor girl more than anything else. You never know what that team may look like. I mean, they play Green Bay, Baltimore, Cincinnati, and Kansas City on the road before they get to Washington in November. So I gave you two must-watch games. Here's a prove-it stretch for me, and it comes early in the season. They play in order. They play Josh Jacobs in the Packers on Thursday Night Football. They play the rookie Ashton Genty in a game against Vegas at home. And then they play Bijan Robinson in week 4. 3 consecutive weeks against 3 teams with potentially big-time running games and running backs. They couldn't stop Bijan Robinson. They couldn't stop any really good back last year. That is a 3-game stretch starting in week 2. That is a prove-it opportunity on their run defense.
And also, week 5 against the Chargers, too, because I feel like they're going to be very run-heavy with Harbaugh. They got Najee Harris in the mix. So I think that's going to be another one.
They have actually, and I looked at that, and it's more about Omarion Hampton than it is Najee Harris.
Yeah.
They drafted Hampton, but to your point, they go a lot of 12 personnel, 13 personnel heavy runs. So that's a good point too. But I was just thinking in terms of
superstar running backs,
level backs potentially. Jacobs, maybe Genty, and then Bijan Robinson. In a row early in the season. It's a good point to add the Chargers in there as a 4th straight opponent where they're going to try to run the football. But Washington, was not good enough against teams with elite running backs last year. They just couldn't get it done. It started in the second half of week 1 against Bucky Irving. You had, in the Arizona game that they were big winners in. You still had James Conner go for 6 yards per carry. You had problems against Derrick Henry, problems against Tyrone Tracy, actually, problems against Saquon Barkley, problems against Bijan Robinson, problems in the postseason against Jahmyr Gibbs and Saquon Barkley. So an early opportunity to kind of prove that your run defense is better than it was last year. And then I'm going to give you an early season measuring stick game, because last year, remember the game against Baltimore in week 6? That was after a 4-1 start, and you felt like, all right, I mean, you beat the Giants, you beat the Bengals on Monday Night Football, but then the Cardinals and the Browns, now you get Baltimore. And we looked at it as an early measuring stick game. Is this a team that's going to win more games than it loses and contend for a legitimate division, and a top, seed? Or is it going to be, in the mix for 9-8 or 10-7? They played well against Baltimore. They lost the game, but they played well, and Jaden looked the part against Baltimore in that particular week. How about this game? And you've already mentioned it. At L.A. to face the Chargers in week 5. That is a well-coached team. It's a big-time quarterback on the road in what should be a neutral environment. That feels like a game that you can win and might even be favored, although, wouldn't surprise me if it's like a pick'em kind of a game. I think that's a big spot because you come off the Giants, Vegas, and Atlanta in 3 of your first 4. You get Green Bay in a short week turnaround after week 1. Sometimes that kind of game, like the Philly game last year a little bit, was misleading on Thursday night. I think an early season measuring stick game is week 5 on the road against, I think, a Chargers team that will be a good football team. It'll be well coached. They have a good quarterback. And that could be a big test at 3-1. Let's just say they're 3-1. They lose to the Packers. They could be 4-0. But 3 of the first 4 games right now, you're a 7-point favorite against the Giants. You'll probably be at least that against the Raiders in week 3, and probably a field goal 4, 5, 6-point favorite on the road in week 4. So it's tough to kind of get beyond that and look at, measuring stick games because you don't know. But early in the season, I don't view the at Chargers the same way I viewed at Baltimore, but I think that's, an underrated spot and game on the schedule early in the season.